Contrary to popular belief, humanity is going to shrink, and judging from what experts and politicians have been saying so far, no one seems to know how to stop the decline or how to solve this problem. And to Stephen Shaw, data scientist and demographer, who's also the director and producer of Birth Gap, Childless World, which explores the complex phenomenon of ultra-low birth rates. The documentary was featured to great acclaim at the New York Chelsea Film Festival. We also screened it at our 2023 Investors Forum, where he sat down with me to examine the global drop in birth rates and the surprising costs involved in this matter. Stephen, at what point did you come across the data about falling birth rates?
January 2016, I remember exactly where I was. I'd heard on the news stories about Germany's total population sinking below that of the UK and France in about 30 years' time. And I thought statistically that's impossible. How does a country lose 20-30% of its population? So I went and looked at some data and I saw, oh my gosh, Germany's population is going to fall that fast. And it's because of long-term low birth rates going back to the 70s. And then I saw the same data for Italy and Spain, and Austria and Switzerland and Portugal. And I felt I should know this. You know, I'm someone involved in demography, but also in terms of predicting and forecasting. That's what I've done for my career for 20 plus years. I thought this was a Japan problem. I didn't know the same thing existed in so many places.
But you come across data, you know, in your line of work, and I'm sure you see surprises. Why this one impacted you so much?
I would equate it to this. It would be like finding out that a meteorite was heading towards Earth and no one was talking about it. No one was calculating when it's going to have an impact. Is it small? Is it big? Or even more if there were like 10 meteorites all heading towards Earth around the same time on the same pathway. No one was looking for what's the connection between all of these. When I looked at birth rates, knowing the impact that falling consumers, falling taxpayers, aging societies will have, the fact that people were blaming this, if that's the right word, people were saying this is a Japanese problem in Japan, it's gender balance, it's work-life balance rather. Or in Europe, it's to do with unemployment rates for youth unemployment. For me, no, this trend had emerged around the same time in multiple countries. It was connected. And I felt for my own sanity, I simply needed to understand what had happened to humanity.
As part of your understanding process, you spent a lot of time interviewing people one-on-one. Is this something normal that's part of data science?
Oh, no, I've never heard of anybody quite doing that. I mean, I interviewed 230 people. The reason I took that approach was, of course, there's many people who have studied this before. Many books have been written, many papers have been written. But no one had taken a global perspective and set out to try and find the common connection to explain all of this. And I felt, well, if other people haven't done that using data, I'm going to fail too. So there must be something else. There must be something out there that people aren't thinking of. And the only way to even come up with an hypothesis, I didn't even have an hypothesis for 18 months, was just sitting down talking to people about their lives and seeing if any common stories, commonalities came out.
You didn't have a hypothesis, but surely you must have had some sort of aim when you started.
Well, yes, I could say the first hypothesis was that there must be a connection. You know, there must be some common trend given how this happened around the same time in multiple countries in the early 70s, and since then has progressed gradually to the industrialized world and beyond. I mean, if you were to fast forward this trend, you would look at it starting in a place, growing inside the country, spreading to neighboring countries, to other parts of the world, and never going back.
Yes.
You know, it's just obvious that there has to be something. So the hypothesis initially was there will be a connection. I didn't know if I'd find it or not. I wasn't particularly hopeful. No one else had. But the second hypothesis was the important one. The hypothesis was the reason for this is X, Y, or Z. And that's what I did come across about 2 years into the project.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, the most simple reality is that when I asked people, do you have any brothers and sisters? Most people said yes, but not everyone. And so I was asking people in Japan and Italy and Germany and Spain, these ultra low birth rate nations, if they had brothers and sisters. And almost everyone did. My own assistant in Japan told me she had 7 brothers and sisters. It's like, and then I went to a little school in rural Italy. And I talked to a mother of 4 children. I heard up in the hills there was a family of 4 children. I thought, great, these are the exception. Let's talk to them. And they said, no, this is not rare. At the school, there's many families in Italy with 3, 4, 5 children. That's normal. When you put that together, there's only 2 ways you can get low birth rates. Either people having 1 child or none. Everything else, everything above 2 increases birth rates above replacement level. The only way a country can have a birth rate of around 1.5 is either lots of people having 1 child, which was not the case, or lots of people having no children. So in the end, the common connection became childlessness. And I think it's a very delicate subject for many understandable reasons. But maybe that's the reason people hadn't really focused too much on childlessness. So the hypothesis that then came that, that childlessness was causing ultra low birth rates across the world.
So you're saying that the reason we weren't privy to this information is because of the fact that it was a sensitive topic?
Well, you need to, first of all, figure out how you're going to measure childlessness. And that wasn't even done. The traditional way is to wait to a woman is 45 and to do some surveys, because there's women age 45 don't go to record that whether they're childless or not. That doesn't happen, obviously. So academic studies are done. There's surveys occasionally from time to time. So we weren't even measuring this. We were waiting to women who were 45 to find out what had happened in their lives. But by definition, a person doesn't know when they become childless. There's no moment you become childless. It's just part of the journey of life. Now, many people choose not to have children, and I'll be their biggest supporter. In fact, I think that's a really important statement for us all as societies to understand that not everyone wants to be a parent, and that's fine. But it turns out 80% or more in most developed countries with this situation, 80% of more of childless people had planned to become parents. Just life got in the way. So what I was able to come up with was a methodology to estimate current societal levels of childlessness based on rates of motherhood. And then from that, all sorts of other interesting things came out about why this might be happening.
Just personally, I'm curious, were there any data or findings that measured people that are on the fence, right? You get people that want children, that don't want children. But what about people that were never had a strong objection either way? Did you see any change in that over the years?
It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting what gets quoted in the press about this and becomes, sort of common knowledge. But when you look into it, it's not as simple as that. When you talk to a person about their personal life, the people who are saying they're on the fence, when you really get to a point of understanding, they're on the fence because maybe they're not certain about their current partner. Maybe they've had a breakup. Maybe there are career issues right now and they know that, well, they just need to work for another 2 or 3 years. So on the fence, it can be used as a description for other things. But when you go beneath that, you really get to a situation where people are saying, all things being perfect, I would want a child or I would not. There were very few people at all who said, I don't really care about this. In fact, no one said that.
The findings, though, going back to my question, the people that were on the fence, I know you're saying that they do lean a particular way depending on the factors. Are you finding that they are swayed towards wanting to have children these days or less because of those factors? Perhaps say economic factors. It's too expensive to have children in this day and age. We might be facing a recession, et cetera, et cetera. Do you find that we are following that direction of travel?
So I think the best way to answer that is to explain a little bit about what happened in Japan and Italy and other countries in the 70s, what happened in South Korea in the 90s, and what happened in the US and many countries after the mortgage crisis shock in 2007, 2008. When there's a major financial crisis, in nations where childlessness is quite low, in Japan, Europe, childlessness was 3-4% in the 70s. In South Korea, it was more like 20%. In the US, it was 15% before all of those crises. When you have a major period of instability introduced into society, what happens? People who have 1 child or more keep having the same number of children they were always going to have on average. There's no change. But people with no children, a significant number defer delay the idea of having a child. And what we see is that that delay, going back to those moments in time, just changes a society, that it becomes the norm to work an extra 3 to 5 years. And once that societal norm becomes commonplace by definition, it's the norm, it becomes more of a career risk, perhaps, more of an anomaly amongst a friend group to actually take that action to have a child. But if you go back to what was the normal state in every one of these countries at different times, it supports the evidence and research saying that the vast majority of people, it's estimated 95% of people at some point in time in their life desire children, 5% don't. So, but again, people on the fence, it's usually a case of, well, not now. Yes, but not now, not yet. And then you ask them, well, when's a good time? And they don't know. They don't know. And then you talk to maybe those people a few years later if they're childless. And that's where more often than not, emotions come out, tears come out. And, the word regret's been used quite a few times.
I wanted to ask you about that because there's always an economic cost related to birth gap and childlessness. You've got an aging population, but then there's also the emotional cost, which you touched on. Now, was that something that you were surprised by? I mean, I know as a woman, it's an important topic and it's one that women do talk about amongst themselves. But as a man, as a data scientist, as a demographer, what was your, I would say, response to that? Just initial response and then subsequently as you did more research?
When I set out, I expected to take around a year to complete this documentary. It ended up taking 7 years. One of the reasons for that was I realized this really isn't just about data. This is about listening to people's stories and more than just simple questions about their lives, that these people were opening up and telling me things that perhaps they'd never told anyone. So an example would be a college professor, a woman who didn't have children, who was initially quite agitated by the questions. And I felt this was kind of awkward, but she wanted to talk. And then by the end, she said, in tears, she'd forgotten that she'd wanted children and she'd been blocking it from herself all those years. So, and many people say, men and women, that they don't talk to their friends, at least openly and honestly about this. And in some cases, maybe don't even ask themselves this question. But what I've seen on the other side from the support groups that childless women have, people who plan to have children, are the raw emotions there that, actually, I think this very week is International Childless Week. And it's a week for people who plan to have children. So there are deep emotions there. What I think, to me, is the most important thing is that there's greater awareness amongst younger people of the potential to experience those feelings. And I have screened a documentary to children as young as 12 years old in one case, and up to college student age. And they're the most engaged in this. They're the most shocked by this because they've never heard of this. We tell young children, get your education, it's the most important thing, and then, focus on your career. Society doesn't then tell people when the right time is to meet a partner and to have a family. And, around a third of people end up in that situation where they may have the career and the education, but it's so I think awareness of younger people to help them make a better informed choice. That's all I'm looking for here, and to have deeper conversations in their family and friend groups.
I want to go back to what you were saying. You mentioned something about people were saying that they didn't have children because they didn't have the right partner at that time.
Yes.
And that may be the reason why they never have children. How do you solve a problem like that?
Well, I think this is where the demographer data scientist has to walk away and say, to younger people, to find a solution. I don't worry about that quite as much. When I see the reaction from younger people watching the documentary and then spending hours afterwards, and I've been at events where we've had QA sessions that have gone on to hours with wine, of course, and enough time. It's a topic that I think will encourage people to think harder about the idea of making a commitment, when today the idea of commitment seems something I mean, if the norm is to have children in our early to mid 30s, we really have got 10 plus years of dating before that, before you need to find someone to have a relationship with. That's fine if people are happy doing that, but I do worry, and what I've seen a lot, frankly, so many stories of couples being together for 5, 7, 8 years and then breaking up. And often it's a woman saying, I thought we were there. I thought, he was the one for life. And yes, what often happens, yes, he's now got a 24-year-old girlfriend. That's not uncommon. So our focus should be on how do we stop these declining birth rates for those who do want children, because it will take Japan 50 years to stabilize its population, even if it finds workable solutions.
Would you say it's too early to tell if COVID's had impact on birth rates?
It was obvious as another crisis, it wasn't going to improve birth rates. People at the start thought maybe people at home will get bored and have babies. It doesn't work that way. And I think the early data that came out suggested there was a drop in births, but it's too early and I'm not prepared to yet. Maybe another 2 years, there might be enough data points to look back. But yeah, I'm not prepared to comment on that yet.
We all know that the Earth is facing limited resources. Would you say that there will be a point where we do reverse the trend, where we'll go back to overpopulating? And if so, how soon would that happen?
So we know that the world's population will peak in 30 to 40 years. We know that because the number of children being born has been falling for around 10 years. So around 2013-14, there was, I believe the number is 142 million children being born per year. Now it's down to around 134. So the number of children being born is falling. What does that mean in time? As people get older and eventually pass on, the world's population will stabilize and then go down. It takes about 50 years for that cycle to work itself out. So we already know what the world's going to look like 50 years from now. And it will perhaps have a similar population to now, but it will be an aging population. It won't be the same structure at all. The over 50s are probably going to dominate the planet at that time.
Have you had any pushback to your work?
Yes. I was planning to give a presentation at Cambridge University. I was invited by a student a young woman, who wanted to screen a film on the campus. It happens often. And 3 days before the screening itself, I got a phone call to say it had been cancelled because there had been a protest that some people were uncomfortable that perhaps a man would be talking to a woman about the topic we're talking about right now. I think it's much broader than that. I think there are elements, I've been called anti-feminist, but I've been called pro-feminist in the same week by different people, depending on how people want to define it. But there's some elements who appear threatened by the idea that maybe women actually do want children, or some women do, and maybe some women have regrets if they don't. I think that message doesn't sit well with opinions that would try to inform people of a viewpoint that is not supported by the data, which is that, it doesn't matter if you have kids or not, life's good anyway. So I think those people perhaps have been upset that my voice is out there. And the university cancelled the event. We managed to find a different room to kind of hold a Q&A. It lasted for 4.5 hours. And the media coverage from that saw viewer numbers jump by 100,000 people in the weeks ahead. So in the end, even that actually helped awareness. So I'm not complaining. It's strange. I should say I never had any direct contact with these people.
Okay.
They wrote a piece in the Cambridge University newspaper in which these people also had not seen the core part of the documentary that deals with childlessness and these issues at all. I was called a misogynist, a racist. I've been called many, many things. I was called many things by those people, but no one's been able to explain them to me. My children watched or heard about this, and they were in fits of laughter on the floor that I could be called a misogynist. And just to explain the documentary, there was over time 9 crew members, a core team of 3, and then other assistants. I was the only man. All other 8 were female. And I think that's because women, I think, were attracted to this topic, to come around the world and actually listen to other women discuss. They're all quite young women too. So the idea that there's any element of this, I mean, I have said it here, I support people who do not want children 100%. All I do in the documentary is have conversations. There's no point where I'm even encouraging a person to have a child. It's just listening to the voices of women across the world mostly. So it's very unusual.
Your listening, any sort of listening, comes with asking questions. What are the right questions you've been asking?
These are questions that you can't start a conversation with because they're too deep, they're too personal. But if you develop a understanding of a person and there's trust, if you start asking people who don't have children if there was a time in the past when they considered children, often that will allow people to start talking about, well, yes, when I was at college, I was dating someone, I thought he was perfect or she was perfect, and we talked about kids, and then that can open up a bigger conversation. I think it's important not just to ask people about their lives today, but also their journey. So I think that would be the best answer I could give you. Try to find out more about people's pathways, and not with some surveys today skip that and they just say, well, do you want kids today? There was one from Harris recently, I had to laugh. They asked people aged 18 to 80 if they want to have kids. So it's a very sensitive but also quite difficult topic to really uncover.
Do you think government has a role to play here? Because I'm sure they are aware of the falling birth rates, but do they really understand, and what steps are they taking?
Well, government has a minor role in terms of the direct solution to this. In fact, if you try to tell people to have children, it most likely will backfire. Can governments create an environment for young people for those who want to have children to be able to do so sooner? Very possibly. But there's no direct correlation, for example, to just giving people money for having children or to opening more kindergartens. There's, for every example that there is that might look that could happen, there's a counterexample. Many of them, most things don't work. But the role of government here, I think, is preparing society for the inevitability. In the case of Japan, even if Japan's birth rate went back up to 2.1 tomorrow, which it won't, its population would still decline for decades down to around half its current level. South Korea, the same. That cannot be stopped now. So in terms of preparing the country to cope with that experience of communities and towns shrinking, of pressures on older people and pensions, I think government really needs to put a lot more effort into not just the policies, but working with their people. So it becomes a shared understanding of here's what we are going to have to face in future.
What are you working on next?
Oh, the documentary was part one of my own personal journey. I'm committing myself to this topic for as long as I've got. I'm working in Japan, where I live right now, with local and regional government, with some central consulting teams in terms of how to advise localities to cope with the change that they're going to face. I can share here, I'm hoping to, around the time of the Osaka Expo in 2 years' time, to have a physical, I'm calling a museum of the future, where people will be able to come and imagine what Japan will be like, and Germany and Italy and all these places, Hong Kong too, in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So for me, it's about increasing awareness of the topic, trying to help communities and nations understand and ultimately cope with the transformation that will happen. And also I'm involved with education programs. I've committed that the documentary will be free for any educator of high school aged children or younger, worldwide, forever. I'm not signing those rights away. More than anything, I want people to be talking about this subject. Last
question. Are you optimistic or cautious about the future, and why?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I'm smiling because that was my last question on every single interview I gave, asking people, are they optimistic? So if I can broaden the answer, am I optimistic? I started very pessimistic about this topic, and I am an optimist about almost everything, but this, I was pessimistic because I felt people don't understand. People don't know what's about to happen. I've changed that because, as it happens, after showing people the documentary, people are starting to talk about it at least, and younger people. I mean, I had a beautiful statement from a young woman who watched it in shock, 24 years old. She thought she had 10 years before she even had to think about children. She said that she was haunted by the future that she might not have. As Charlie Bentley asked her from Cambridge, I mean, isn't it just beautiful, but the haunting words? When I hear that, that gives me optimism, that awareness of these things might encourage people when they meet someone who could be a parent along with them to maybe think more seriously than society encourages them today. So I don't think dating apps are the solution, though. The dating app side of things really worries me, frankly. So.
Well, Stephen Shaw, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.